Hello and welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Harrison Sherrod, Executive Director of Pentimenti Productions. We're one of the co-presenters of today's program, Ray Yoshida's Home for His Muses. Before I begin, a couple quick housekeeping notes. The closed captions are available for this program, and you can elect to turn those on or off, I believe at the bottom of your screen by clicking the CC icon and then selecting live transcript or show subtitle. And as far as the run of show for today, we're going to screen a 30-minute video first, which will then be followed by a live conversation with myself and our other wonderful panelists, after which the group will take questions from you, our awesome attendees. So if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A button below. You can just click the Q&A icon there at the bottom of your screen and submit a question, and we will field that question later on. We're thrilled to have you joining us this afternoon, and I'd like to read a few words from our program description to begin. So Ray Yoshida was an influential artist and beloved teacher who taught for more than 40 years at the School of the Art Institute, Chicago. As an extension of his creative life, Yoshida voraciously acquired a spectacular range of objects from folk and popular culture, artworks by friends and former students, and works by notable non-mainstream artists, which he artfully arranged throughout his Chicago home. Today's program will consider Yoshida's collection and its impact in Chicago, the enthusiastic responses it elicited, and its new permanent home at the John Michael Kohler Art Center's Art Preserve. My fellow participants include educator Lisa Stone, Art Preserve curator Laura Bickford, who will give a virtual tour of the Yoshida installation, and Yoshida's friend, artist Frank Trankina, whose work collected by Yoshida is in the Art Preserve. Ray Yoshida's Home for His Muses, this program, is presented as part of Art Design Chicago Now, an initiative funded by the Terra Foundation for American Art that amplifies the voices of Chicago's diverse creatives, past and present, and explores the essential role they play in shaping the now. And with that, we'll go ahead and roll the video, which is about a half hour again. And after that, we will begin our live discussion. A reminder to my fellow panelists, you can go ahead and turn off your cameras and mute yourselves for this portion. And we'll be back in a bit. Thanks so much.
Greetings. I'm honored and excited to participate with my inspired colleagues in this program about the incomparable artist Ray Yoshida and his world of found, rescued, and artfully arranged objects. Many thanks to the Terra Foundation for American Art for hosting this program about Ray Yoshida's seminal place in a wondrous and ongoing moment of creative art making and placemaking in Chicago. Ray Yoshida was born in 1930 on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. I'm using this drawing by Joseph Yoakum from Ray's home collection to represent his homeland. Ray was fiercely proud of his Pacific Islander identity. He studied at the University of Hawaii in the late 1940s, later earned his BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, SAIC henceforth, in 1953, and his MFA from Syracuse University in 1958. I have to apologize here that this very brief presentation will not explore Yoshida's art, which I encourage you to do, but instead will explore his artwork's stepchildren and muses, his home collection. Ray returned to Chicago and taught at SAIC from 1959 to 2005. That's Ray on the left and Dean Roger Gilmore on the right. Ray was a legendary, outstandingly original teacher and encourager who had a profound influence on countless artists, including Frank Trankina, who we'll hear from shortly. We think of Chicago as the city of architecture, but for Yoshida and other artists, it was, among other things, a goldmine of objects. As an integral aspect of his creative life, Yoshida voraciously acquired a spectacular range of objects, mostly pre-owned, pre-loved, and later orphaned, as well as artworks by friends and former students, and works by notable non-mainframe artists such as Joseph Yoakum, who he acquired many works from, and Martin Ramirez, whose drawing is on the upper left. Ray haunted the legendary Maxwell Street Market, which scholar Bill Swisslow calls Chicago's great art center. The market began in the early years of the last century, and on Sunday mornings, Halsted and Maxwell Streets, south of Roosevelt Road, became a cacophony of vendors selling all manner of just about everything. Set up in between food carts, enlivened with exhortations from storefront churches and live Delta blues music. Here's a clip of vintage footage that Tom Palazzolo, also known as Tommy Chicago, included in his 1982 film Maxwell Street, which appears to be from maybe the 1950s. And following is a clip from the outstanding documentary, And This Is Free, The Life and Times of Chicago's Legendary Maxwell Street, directed by Mike Shea in 1965, around the years when Yoshida and other artists were haunting the market.
Around here, it's a little of everything. If you want stale bread, you can get stale bread too. Everything and anything. Something that you looked for your whole life that you couldn't find anywhere else. You come around here, if you got time to spend the day looking for it, you'll find it.
Says, where did you get your pretty little shoes, woman? Your dress so fine. I got your shoes off Maxwell. I got the dress off Halsted. Lord, Lord, I got the dress off
Thank you, Mike Shea. Sourcing objects from flea markets and other secondhand venues was not an original artist's practice in Chicago. Legendary surrealist writer and manifestoizer André Breton wrote, quote, "About the flea market at Saint-Ouen, I go there often, searching for objects that can be found nowhere else, old-fashioned, broken, useless, almost incomprehensible, even perverse," end quote, which he brought back and arranged in his Paris apartment. Due to Chicago's rich private and public collections of surrealism, Ray and other artists were aware of and informed by surrealist practices, including the surrealist dinner party game of making exquisite corpses. This is an exquisite corpse Christina Ramberg, Phil Hansen, Ray Yoshida, and Roger Brown collaborated on in the collection of the Roger Brown Study Collection. They understood that the objects they were attracted to were all made by creative people, makers of meaning, and collecting was a way of connecting the realm of everyday life, the vernacular realms, with emotional, spiritual, psychic, and even mystical realms. Yoshida and other artists considered objects of interest to be auspicious. They allowed objects and images to trigger ideas and set creative energies into motion. Yoshida's approach to responding, acquiring, and arranging objects was not lost on Roger Brown, whose home collection is the most similar to Ray's in the type of objects and compositional arrangements, and is preserved as the Roger Brown Study Collection of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Christina Ramberg went on the so-called trash treasure hunting expeditions organized by Ray and was always on the prowl for doll-like objects. Barbara Rossi also filled her home with objects which she actively sought out. She said, quote, "We would look at the rejected and understand what we could learn from it before it disappeared. Sometimes that moment was very beautiful," end quote. She also said, quote, "I feel like I've gone through my whole life on my eyeballs. I just keep rolling along on my eyeballs. I don't know any other way to do it, to be an artist without being a seeker for your eyes," end quote. So let's take a peek into Ray's home collection when it was at 1944 North Wood Street in Chicago's Bucktown neighborhood. Ray was expertly engaged in the coincidence of discovery and intrinsic relationships between unrelated things. He brought together objects from the far corners of the world of object making and let them work it out. Yoshida was described as a collector by many, but he identified very importantly as a responder. And in this light, he was a first responder of the highest order, prodigiously scouting, finding, and responding. In 1985, an SAIC class curated an exhibition of 159 objects from his collection, which Ray gave the poetic title, Ray Yoshida's Adoptive Homes for Misplaced Muses. The students were apparently more comfortable with the white cube presentation mode and gave Ray's objects more breathing room in the gallery than they were used to back at home. In the last few years of his life, this Pacific Islander at heart was brought home to Hawaii by adoring relatives, where he continued to develop his shelf life, finding objects of interest and arranging them on shelves, responding, bringing the world together through its assorted objects. Yoshida died in 2009. His home collection was rescued by Kohler Foundation and gifted to the John Michael Kohler Arts Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where Karen Patterson curated Ray Yoshida's Museum of Extraordinary Values in 2013. And here's a clip from Karen Patterson.
This is an artist's home, and this is the way that an artist lives. So the story of Ray is that he needed to be surrounded by these evocative, inspiring artworks and objects in order to ignite a practice that lasted the way that it did.
Thank you, Karen. Andre Breton's collection was unfortunately dismantled and auctioned off in 2003, but a selection of works were acquired by the Centre Pompidou, where a permanent display of objects can be viewed from the other side of a glass wall. A petition of protest against the dissolution of his collection exclaimed, quote, "We find the very idea of this event to be to the shame of the French government and contrary to the best accounting of the history of the 20th century. Together, the manuscripts, books, objects, and art within Andre Breton's studio at 42 Rue Fontaine are very different from other great collections. Together, they represent a global idea, the likes of which has never before been seen in Europe or elsewhere," end quote. It's too bad they didn't know about the Chicago Artists' Home Museums and their kinship with Breton's. The full petition beautifully articulates the value of artists' home collections, and the letter closes with the Gustave Moreau, Freud's Berggrass 19, Adolf Wolfley's Room, the Watts Towers of Los Angeles, were all places once on the verge of oblivion. We say in the spirit of those great places, please, no sale, end quote. Quite fortunately, Yoshida's entire collection, which includes work by at least 35 Chicago artists, is preserved at the Art Preserve, which Laura Bickford will show you through shortly. So thank you for your kind attention, and now I'll turn it over to Harrison Sherrod, Executive Director of Pentimenti Productions.
Thank you for the introduction, Lisa, and my thanks to the Terra Foundation, in addition to all of my awesome co-presenters and panelists for facilitating this wonderful program. I'm Harrison Sherrod, Executive Director of Pentimenti. We're a film production company and arts nonprofit based here in Chicago. We're responsible for the critically acclaimed, award-winning 2014 documentary, Harry Who and the Chicago Imagists. That film chronicled the rich history, the unique aesthetic sensibility, and the lasting legacy of a group of artists who cultivated their talents at the School of the Art Institute. One of the threads that many of these artists shared in common was the influence of Ray Yoshida, who, as Lisa covered in her presentation, was a professor at SAIC. Over the course of creating Harry Who and the Chicago Imagists, we interviewed numerous artists, curators, and scholars, and for this program, Leslie Buchbinder, director of Harry Who and the artistic director of Pentimenti, curated a selection of never-before-seen footage of our film subjects speaking about the impact and the influence of Ray Yoshida. We've coupled this with excerpts from one of the rare cinematic documents of Ray, a short film by director Seton Cogleshall titled The Individuality of the Inanimate Object.
They're African, New Guinea, American naive, and Chicago artists. I think they all have a dialogue with one another. They're talking to each other, and I find that exciting, stimulating. I'm in most of the time, and it's like you're creating your environment, and I want things that make me smile or give me excitement.
His eye to find strange things. I mean, that artists such as Joseph Joachim, so he had a lot to do with uncovering and making known, and many others. And Ray was that teacher that collected that artists knew about and saw that stuff. And I mean, they saw the institute, they saw Ray's collection of Jiggs and Maggie ashtray holders or whatever it was. And that, it sort of hooked up because he had this incredible eye. And I think he was a kind of lonely person, a private person, and had a certain sadness about him, I think. Being an artist to the degree and intensity that he was, I think, cost him a lot. And he knew it, but was glad to pay. A kind of hermetic personality, in a way, that also an intense, sharp observer of everything. And sort of proud of a kind of slightly outsider status, being a Japanese origin born in Hawaii. And he liked kind of not having to pretend to be one of those arts kids. Nor did he. And he was an inspired teacher. I mean, also he had that taste for the painstaking thoroughness, I think, comes from Yoshida a lot, to artists who worked with him. And he had a wonderful trick in teaching. In studios where there were like little separate nooks for different artists, when Ray would be giving a critique to someone, his voice suddenly got very loud. He said, "Have you ever thought of adding this over there? Or, maybe you need to change that." See, because it was aimed at the whole room. So everybody like listened up because Ray wasn't being slightly deaf. He was, I don't know, making the best use of his time, I suppose. And his advice was always good. And he brought to my attention quite a number of artists that I would never have known about, even while they were students, Richard Hull and others. And so he had that gift. He was a finder.
The first reaction is very instinctive and spontaneous, and then later on, it's like teaching. I mean, you come up to a student's work and you react to what's there, you feel it, and after a while, you can get more rational and realize that this is working better than this is, or this isn't. And I think I do that with the objects, but I don't come home and place them in this white area and give them a formal critique.
He had a wonderful way of teaching. If he was interested in a student's work, he would have a way of seeing beyond what you were already doing and what the possibilities were for your development. And he would just come in and drop a book by your place that had the work of an artist that you should be exposed to. And that was a wonderful way to grow. And he just had such a wonderful understanding as a teacher in that way. And so I had him actually in my first year. There was a foundation program. At that time, the school on and off has had foundation programs. And I had him as my drawing teacher first year. And then, he continued really in the role of a mentor all through my time at the School of the Art Institute. And I would bring work to show him, and we would talk about it. But he was tremendously giving as a teacher. And just, I can't really stress how important he was to me as a student. And then, of course, Ray, after school, really, or even almost during school, became really a contemporary, as well as a teacher and a friend of our family, and just a very, very important person in my life.
Sue Ellen was, second or third year student when Ray Yoshida began to celebrate what she was doing, and people looked and nobody could believe it, and her aesthetic was truly groundbreaking.
Sue Ellen was tremendously close to Ray, actually, and tremendously involved in deeply listening to what Ray would talk to her about. And to some extent, everyone was. Ray had a unique way of actually drawing out an individual's subject matter, so that they could isolate unique qualities that they perhaps didn't even consider important, or didn't even consider, or weren't aware of, period. So that they became emblems of their personality. And it's something that you can see pretty much in all the related Chicago Imagists' work, is that interest in sort of excavating your ideas to find and discarding things, and to find a core that you can build as your own unique experience.
Ray Yoshida gave me permission to not make paintings, just to make drawings. And there's a whole drawing series that I did through graduate school that were larger than the ones that were 10 by 13 that I did initially. Those were hard to see because they weren't as volumetric, and I divided them up into panels. So the quilting kind of came out of what I was doing with the drawings in a way.
I had Ray Yoshida for only one course. It was a silkscreen course, a rather experimental course in silkscreen, where we tried everything but using a squeegee, it seemed like. It was very interesting. And I made a dollar bill in his course, and he signed one side, and I signed the other side. And I got a lot of that.
I asked Ray if he would be my independent advisor. And I said, but I was really having a lot of trouble talking to people about the work, and I didn't want any input at all. So would he be willing to just look at my paintings but not talk to me at all, just look a couple times, so to make sure that I was working, so I wasn't just sloughing off and not doing anything. And Ray was nice enough to go ahead and do that. And I passed. Yeah, of course, the irony is that Ray's probably the one painting instructor that would really have, I would have probably have listened to or something like that. But I just couldn't handle it at that point. So as it turned out, a number of the people who were really interested in Ray Yoshida and Whitney Halstead, ended up becoming the images.
I think Jim and Gladys probably had him too. I'm not sure, but I know Roger and Phil and Chris were really very friendly with him. But so I knew who he was, and he didn't really know who I was. But so I remember, and I think I did eventually after I got out of school, met him once or twice, maybe with Whitney. And but I remember him going to his teaching gig, and he lived kind of near North and Sedgwick, where the Sedgwick Street gallery was, and we would be maybe sitting on the curb or something right by that L stop, which he used. And I remember seeing him go to school, and say hi to him. And I remember one story that he had this insulation that was, I guess, a sound thing where he put the egg cartons on his wall, and to obliterate sound. I'm not sure from what the sound source was, but he didn't play except a big part in terms of my early years, except just in tales. People, maybe Jim and Gladys, talking about him. And I think they talked about this egg carton thing that he established in the room to soundproof the studio. Maybe that might have been it, so he wouldn't be distracted.
But I think that all artists do collect, whether it's a matter of going out and landscape and observing the trees or the forms of the earth. They're still collecting data. And when one does, sketches before a painting, that's a kind of collecting too. We have different ways of doing that. But there is a tendency for a group of us Chicago artists to make the collection a real physical reality, like bring it in our homes and live with it and converse with them and so forth. It is a kind of obsession or affliction. I call it an affliction sometimes. Like Marguerite's affliction for the bizarre, some of us have different kinds of affliction, but collecting itself somehow is an obsession affliction. I find I'm not interested in looking for a cure for it.
Ray's interest in collecting as an artistic practice unto itself, or almost a way of life, was clearly the source of inspiration for so many of the Imagist artists. And this ethos of collecting as a means of preservation, of responding, as Lisa eloquently put it, is something that we endeavor to do as documentarians at Pentimenti. So I encourage you not only to watch Harry Hu and the Chicago Imagist, but also to check out our Chicago Imagist Archive, which is a free interactive encyclopedic resource surveying the who, what, when, where, and why of Chicago Imagism, including a page devoted to Ray Yoshida. And now I'd like to pass it to Laura Bickford, curator at the John Michael Kohler Art Center.
Hi, I'm Laura Bickford, and I'm the curator at the John Michael Kohler Art Center. and we're standing here on the second floor of our newly opened building, the Art Preserve. And the Art Preserve was specially designed to house our collection of artist-built environments. And the Art Center thinks of an artist-built environment as a total work of art that an artist often spent years or decades making. There's no separation between their art and their life, and oftentimes you can't divide the environment into disparate components. They were never meant to be separated or sort of seen as individuals. Instead, they're a total work of art where the relationships that are most important are the components to each other and the components to the whole. And we have over 35 artists here that span the United States. Some of them went to art school, some didn't go to art school, some used sort of found and humble materials and never showed their work outside of the barn or yard that they made it in. Others got international art world success and were featured in exhibitions around the world. And when we started working with this building, we tasked the architecture firm Trace Birds out of Denver, Colorado, to really build a building that was specially responsive to our collection. And that took several different shapes. They used really humble materials. There's local river rock through the floors. There's a lot of wood and concrete with very little extra ornamentation to really sort of pay homage to the humble materials that these artists often used and the kind of really utilitarian nature of the building, which is as a space to hold our collection. When we thought about each artist, we wanted to keep all of their work together and really give visitors the experience of what it might have been like to visit that environment. So when we were really designing the building, each space was meant to have its own separate feel. So we really have a bunch of little different contained worlds that can transport the viewer to somewhere else. And today I really wanted to focus on Ray Yoshida and some of the considerations that we put into his environment, how it came here, and sort of what decisions we made when we installed it at the Art Preserve. After Ray Yoshida died in 2009, his estate worked with the Kohler Foundation to make placements of his work in museums across the country. And the bulk of his home and studio collection came to the Art Center, which resulted in a 2013 exhibition series called The Open Eye that was curated by Karen Patterson. And that exhibition series really became the premise, the kind of template that we used when we thought about designing this space. And we knew that we didn't want to do a sort of recreation or a one-to-one play of the way that Ray's apartment was into this space. So we came up with this term that we call an evocation, which is as it sounds. It's meant to evoke the feeling and the spirit of the place. And we knew that Ray constantly sort of moved objects around, and part of his joy was in creating new relationships between colors and forms and kind of an ecosystem. And so we wanted the spirit of that to maintain in this space, and we knew that in order to do that, we couldn't just look at a photo and then do exactly what he did, and that we wanted to keep this space kind of alive and evolving and feeling full and rich. And I say all of that to say that there is one spot that we actually did a one-to-one recreation, and it was this shelf behind me. And this was sort of one of the centerpieces of Ray's home, this kind of arranging of objects on these linear shelves. And this became a real touch point for a lot of other Imagist collectors in Chicago, and most of them, if not all of them, had a sort of similar shelf moment. That was this kind of focal point where it really highlighted all of the different sorts of objects that they collected and the way that they liked for them to live together. And so if you focus on any one of these shelves, you kind of really have a complete explanation of the kinds of things that Ray liked to collect and the way that he lived. And we can just take, the bottom shelf, for example. Right in the center is a Carl Worsam genuine genie wine figure, sort of featured in front of a Jim Nutt painting, flanked by a William Dawson sculpture, who was a really famous sort of Chicago self-taught wood carver. We have a tramp art box and a sort of tramp art style cross with a variety of sort of thrift store and kind of amateur vernacular found objects, things from the industrial design world like the scooper on the far left, a sort of cut Haitian tin shadow puppet next to some Indonesian and Balinese style puppets, kind of all commingling into this place that talks about the relation, the conversations that the objects could be having and how they're each affected by being positioned in proximity to the other. Ray Yoshida taught at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for decades, influencing generations of artists. One of the things that he taught people to really focus on was the potentiality of objects, what they could be, what they might be. He was always challenging his students to find the best trash treasures at Maxwell Street Market and imagine how they could influence their work and how they could change them and they could be changed by them. And a perfect example is the way that Ray himself worked. And if we look to the left here, this was his final painting that was on the easel in his studio when he died. And if you really, because it's here in this unfinished state, it really begs for you to look at how it was made and the composition and what he was thinking about. And we positioned it here in this space right next to this arrangement of objects that came from his studio, particularly next to these sort of folk art bottle cap constructions. And if you start to look at the articulation of their arms and the individual bottle caps and then back to the painting, you really see that there might have been a kinship there, that Ray was looking to the forms of these things to influence the form of his work. And when you spend more time in this space surrounded by both his paintings and his works on paper and his objects, you really start to see what he was pulling from. All the textures, the forms, the lines, the contours of the surface, they all became sort of equal points of inspiration for him. And he used the objects to kind of guide his work, which is another reason why we consider him an environment builder, really having the impact that the work that he collected had on the work that he was making. The Art Preserve was designed to be what we call visible curated storage, which means that it is the permanent storage space for our collection. Everything that we own that's part of these artist-built environments is in this building, although some of it's hidden from view. And a perfect example is in the Ray Yoshida space, we have these flat files. And in these flat files, they contain various objects from Ray's collection that we kind of are storing to rotate through for the health and life of the objects. But they also really excitingly contain hundreds and hundreds of works on paper of Ray's that came with the estate. And something that the Art Preserve hopes to accomplish throughout its life is to be a laboratory and a project space where we can use the collection to continue to learn more about the artists and the environments and the way that we live in our world. And a perfect example of one of these projects is the eventual cataloging, archiving, and organizing of all of Ray Yoshida's works on paper. And we have work that starts from his school days up until the year of his death. And it's an exciting, really rich treasure trove of objects that will teach us so much about his life and his work. We just need someone to come and dig in and work through them.
Hello again. Thanks so much for watching. I would now like to bring in artist Frank Trankina, who is a former student and close friend of Ray's, who's deeply informed by Ray's creative and collecting processes, and whose work is represented in the Yoshida wing at the Art Preserve. Frank received his Master of Fine Arts degree in painting and drawing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And he was the first recipient of the prestigious Alexander Rooch Award in painting, as well as an award from the Illinois Arts Council. His work has been represented by galleries across the globe, and he is a professor of art and painting at Northern Illinois University. Also joining us is Lisa Stone, educator, author, and former curator of the Roger Brown Study Collection at the School of the Art Institute, as well as Laura Bickford, curator of the John Michael Kohler Art Center. Hello, everyone. How's it going? I thought we could just begin by asking you, Frank, could you just speak a little bit about your relationship with Ray? I know it's a loaded question, just how you met and just kind of the history of that. And then maybe we can get into some of the slides that we have available.
Well, it's an honor and privilege to be here, and thank you so much, Harrison and Laura and Lisa, for this. It was really very moving to see all that footage and brought back a lot of memories, of course. And for many who might be watching who were students of his or just had experiences with Ray, I couldn't just echo everything everyone was saying in big ways. My relationship started in grad school when I met Ray first in the late 80s. And then it kind of blossomed. And I guess the important well, very important thing amongst other things was him making a connection between collecting and making artwork, which even before my experience with him, I had started collecting somewhat as an undergrad, but I never thought it was like subject matter for my work. Somehow it just didn't seem like I was connecting that. And then of course, Ray, just went full steam ahead when we got together, and then that was all history, so to speak, after that.
Well, wonderful. Maybe it would be helpful to switch over to some of the slide images that we have available. I think Annie can pull those up for us and spotlight those. And Frank, I know that you borrowed objects from Ray to use in your paintings. Can you sort of discuss how did you select these particular objects, and what was Ray's response to your initial request to do that? I think we've got a couple of your paintings here in the subsequent slides after this title card, and then the kind of the objects that inspired them.
Well, there were many hours spent in at Ray's house with his collection, and again echoing what all the things that were said in the earlier segments. Just being in there was phenomenal, and being a young artist and a painter, and the visual information was overwhelming often, and the work I was making at the time, which kind of was in things that I discussed with Ray, was about identity, which on that first slide you showed, there was a John Henry figure that's in the middle that was hand carved by an unknown anonymous artist, and somehow that was one of our conversations led to Ray just pulling it down and saying, well, here, maybe think about how you can integrate it. And then next slide, I had been working on these paintings that had to do with identity, and this was called Manifest Destiny, and it had something to do with all the maybe stereotypes or the kind of identities these objects are given by the makers of them. And so it became a fascinating thing for me. It's sort of that, and part of it is, I think both Ray and I shared this was like when you pick something up and say, what the hell, and what is this? Like what was somebody thinking when they made this? How did this thing come to being? So several of these objects in this painting were found on Ray and our excursions. And I don't know if you have if there was another one there.
We have.
Yeah, and this one, this house was another thing that I borrowed. If you can see it right in the middle there, this it kind of looked like a bank, but it really wasn't a bank, and it was just so tenderly painted by hand. I was a little fascinated by it, and again, this was a group of paintings that I've been working on for some early years there. And I also was in my own work, and this kind of went with some of the dialogue Ray and I had, is that I was really into like people giving me things like this painting, or lending me things or sending me things and being surprised. And several of these objects in here, somebody gave to me, or I found the farm people one. I think I found that at the indoor Maxwell Street. That was, once it was, it had a manifestation after it actually closed on the street, which was not quite the same. And that pink chicken in front, Christine Tarkowski actually gave me that, and I was like, but anyway, yeah. There was like this. I think going, back to the thing the other speakers were echoing is, this thing that about handing things off, and Lisa mentioned that too. I appreciated that about the lives that these objects have, where they're kind of, maybe I don't want to know if they're adored, but they're kind of taken care of and wanted and everything, and then they become lost, and then maybe they become orphaned, and maybe then they found again. And there's just this richness about that. And this, this painting, actually, this is in Leslie's collection, but this painting is, I had talked to Ray before he left Chicago. I said, Ray, I want to do a homage painting to you, because we often talked about homages as well, because we spent a lot of time in the car together, driving back and forth. And we talk. And by the way, one other thing I'll mention, if you ask about the, I know a question about the excursions, but food was a lot of part of it. So we would be like eating a lot together. But I talked about this homage, and Ray picked out those objects, and he gave them to me. And as Dennis Adrian was mentioning earlier, anybody who knew Ray, he had this way of having a booming voice. And often when he said my name, he would say Frank, and then part of the title was he often would, not just to me, but to other artists and students, he'd say, why are you doing this? And he'd point to something very specific, but he used his booming voice, and he picked these objects up and he handed them to me. And he said, he, in a quiet voice, he said, I think that's a good idea. When I've talked about doing an homage, and then, but with his booming voice, he turned around and said, but I want them back. And it moves me quite a bit, because, he left then, and I never got a chance, we went to Hawaii, and I never got a chance to give them back. So I'd still have them. But I think, then the painting was done the year after he passed. So it was, he never really got to see the painting. But I did have a lot of fun painting one of his paintings, especially it was a painting that I saw in his studio while he was working on it.
I think we have a few of your photos here that you took actually at the art center. Maybe we can just cycle through a few of these.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know Laura so eloquently went through a lot of, bringing these connections between his collection and his own work. But I just have a few tidbits here that the Sandwich Flea Market ticket right there, I was with him on that trip. So I saw that and I was like, wow. But that's this bulletin board also, I think, I know it's probably not exactly as Laura's mentioned the way Ray had it at his studio, but those are, those tidbits in this photo really give you a great idea of, just these fragmental things that became a family to him. And especially those things on the top were always interesting, things that took form, that he interspersed in this collection, and he would call those, he had a word, he would call those aberrations. And he would just have those spotted around, like those smashed pieces of metal on top of the bulletin board. And of course, some of his, Giorgio Morandi and all these fantastic artists that he loved, we would talk about.
These bulletin boards are pretty close to how we had them. We did a few, we had to rotate a few things because there was like people's phone numbers on there, or like credit card numbers, or like doctors' names. And so we had to do some artful kind of covering and rotating so that we weren't showing things that maybe didn't need to be shown. But these are pretty close to how the kind of last photos that we were given of them.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. And I did take a photo, noticed that our accountant, who Ray actually, I guess I could say his name because I told him about it, but Robert Pernini, who was in the loop for, his father was Ray's accountant. And I, since he's been my accountant for 30 years. So I sent a picture to him, and he was kind of touched by that. So I said, you have to go up and see that you're in a museum, This is one other aspect I'd like to just mention. And again, you guys are aware of it, and you touched on it, but part of the collecting, there was different aspects to Ray's collection, obviously, because it's very complex, what he was, you know, his scope of things. But one part of the collecting process, especially in my days with him, was him not only gathering objects for his collection as inspiration, but he also was gathering stuff to make art, and especially the comics were a big thing. And I was often the lackey that was, you know, carrying around the box of comics that he just bought, a whole box of comics or 2 boxes from a vendor at one of the flea markets. And I'd also like to mention that, and I'm not sure what it's probably went to Hawaii with him, but he did with these, and I gearing this towards artists, and which was remarkable and always touched me, is when he worked on his collages, he had an actual palette of these pieces. They were all arranged in little sections according to color and texture. And it was kind of sizable, but it was remarkable to see, you know. So he would take these things after he cut them, and he would gently deacidify them, you know, so that they be archival, and then he arrange them in this box. So for any artist, and you know, it still was completely inspiring for me to see that.
It's interesting that you say, or you mentioned earlier, just the term fragments, and that's, I think, so important to Ray's, not only his collecting, but his work. And there's a quote somewhere, and I'm paraphrasing here, where Ray said that the paintings become a gathering space for his fragmented self, which is so poetic and beautiful.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks for these photos.
And this photo looks so great with the painting in back of you, because it's like there's a relationship just right there.
Yeah, this is a painting by Ray Yoshida in the Roger Brown Study Collection called Exploding Objects.
Perfect. And yeah, I know, Laura, that was great that I love the way this is laid out, because these again, the objects on the left were things he often referred to, in, you know, in his own specific way, as aberrations. And these things became really, I think, important to him developing the shapes, these shapes that often are cryptic and sometimes more accessible or not, in his paintings.
And I won't say who, but I will say that several staff members at the Art Center have also now started collecting run over road metal, sort of inspired by this. And there may or may not be a kind of gathering to see who can find the best one based on kind of Ray's collecting of these. And then, you know, kind of walking and noticing this thing that you kind of pass every day, you know, kind of still his ability to kind of, you know, reorient your vision to something that you know, quite literally stepped on. And now instead you see it and you find, you know, these paintings on the sidewalk when you're walking.
Well, I would like to, I mean, I'll just very quickly add, you know, because Ray was an incredible formalist as well. And the thing that's not always talked about so much is that he did study with Ad Reinhardt in Syracuse University. And he always referred to Ad Reinhardt as really his, you know, he said he was that kind old German man, you know, and you know, Ray was really a very formal, you know, especially if, you know, as far as a painter or compositional person, you know, that I would like to add that too. But I think that's wonderful that his spirit is kind of seeping out into the others now.
That kind of brings up a thought, Laura, your colleagues that are collecting things, it sounds like there's a little bit of competition there. And it always surprised me. I found it curious that Ray and other artists would go out thrifting and Maxwell Streeting and so forth together, which I would never do that. I don't want to be looking for things with people that are either smarter than me or have the same sensibility. Can you talk a little bit about, was there a method to, because you went out looking for objects with Ray, I guess quite a bit. Was that methodical or was it just by chance?
Well, you know, you know, there was kind of a process to it. Ray would, and this is, I can't even believe I'm saying that this is a while back, but he would clip out from the Sunday paper or whatever, paper, the notices for the flea market. And then when we would go to lunch or dinner during the week, he would slide it over to me and say, "We're going." And then we would go. And Ray was, and this is one thing I would share with everybody, that is, amongst things that are, like Sue Ellen said, and I was very close to Sue Ellen, is that, Ray was really profoundly influential to me, and in a myriad of ways. But he had this phrase that I think could really, he had this phrase, and he'd say it sometimes before he left, sometimes when we're in the car, and he'd say, "Frank, there's something out there around the corner waiting for me." And that line, its reverberation is not only as an artist is it there, but it's almost like it has a very profound life feeling to me as well. And I don't know if that always happened when we went, because Ray wasn't always just grabbing anything. He was very concentrated, and when we got there, he did not browse. He was like looking at everything, and he was intent. He had a lot of attentiveness, and if I stopped on something and I kind of picked it up, Ray had his way of going like this, just kind of, if it was okay, if not, he'd be kind of just, his eyes would close a little bit. So we had some kind of body language. But one thing people should know too, and some people do know that were with him, is he was a master haggler. I mean, he was like unbelievable. One of his things, he had this posture. He would say the price he wanted. He'd pick it up. Sometimes he'd say how much or something, but if it was, it was battle. And he would say, his posture would go, "I don't need this. I don't need this." And the person would be unnerved, and often they would like go down, and not once in a while they would go after him. And sometimes he'd take it personally, and he'd just like turn around and say no, and it was almost choreographed, and most of the time it really felt that way. And the reason I put this slide in, and again, I know Laura and the other panelists were drawing these things too, again, towards an artist, which is probably a separate conversation, but those memory jugs, I think, especially in his car paintings, and I have a slide of the car paintings, I think, but those memory jugs of the objects being embedded or buried or into the jug or into his paintings. I think these were crossover influence to his work, definitely.
I have a question for you, Frank, just about the kind of cross-pollination between collecting and your artistic practice. When you're out in the world accumulating objects and items, are you thinking there in the moment, I see how this is going to figure in a painting? Or is it only later, after the fact, when you live with the object, that it just kind of strikes you, aha, this could be source material for a work?
I think both. I hate to be a cop-out and say both, because now I don't know what Ray would do now. Sometimes I often think about it, because a lot of my flea market, I have to say, that is just sitting on my chair and going on eBay or something like that now, which is kind of doesn't have that same flavor. But when I do that, I can be more specific about what I'm looking for. But when I was with Ray, I think that's a good question. I think it was more living with it, and my collection has expanded quite a bit, and it's different. And I think we really appreciated about each other, is that we collected different things. We had an eye for different. I was doing like mid-century kind of outcasts and things. And by the way, when I started collecting with Ray, one other point I should make is when I started collecting with Ray, his folk art collection had already been established and already was, firmly recognized and everything. So when we were often he would, of course he was getting his comics and all that, but he was starting to collect some oddities as well that were like not in that. For instance, we got the Nancy mask together, that's in the iconic Nancy mask, and he always kept that hanging in his studio. And and then one other aspect, it's those of you who knew Ray, is he had just a wonderful cutting sense of humor, and he would answer the door with that Nancy mask on often, and I would just be like, whoa, and so again, this goes back to, I think, people talking about his collection being living. It was a living thing. It wasn't. And the other thing was those pencils. I remember him getting that pencil sample together, and that was so he wasn't just saying, because often, once in a while, some of these flea market people knew him, and they would try to schlep off some folk like bottle cap art or something on him. And, he kind of made it clear that wasn't the only thing he was collecting.
Yeah, his collection is such an incredible deep dive core sample. Oh, they're the pencils into material culture, not just American material culture, but things from all over the world, but particularly things that were made as craft, or in some cases, craft abuse projects, and things that you read about in the Popular Mechanics, or something that became popular for a while and then went out of style. I love this figure beneath the pencil, sewn together pencils, which he and Roger Brown found in South Wayne, Indiana, a whole yard show of a fellow whose name I forget, who and they just went crazy. They both bought all they could get from this one fellow who sold lawn ornaments, and they're very, very, of course, a million stories that and narratives that come out of this. I don't know, I call it the Ray Yoshida wing. What do you call it, Laura?
Yeah, we call the Ray Yoshida. I mean, I think technically we're supposed to refer to it as the Ray Yoshida collection area, but I think most of us kind of think of it as Ray Yoshida is actually just what we say, which I actually kind of love, because so many people and have spoken about it too here, about, that he was private or kind of kept to himself and sort of lived publicly through the sharing of these objects and through the experience of being in his apartment, and was, if you look around, like, this was what was important to him, and this was what he valued, and this was how he kind of expressed what, the kind of the best of the world through these kind of objects. And so I think we just kind of call it Ray Yoshida, which is nice. And I think kind of speaking to what Lisa was saying, we're kind of noticing, spending a lot of time in this space and kind of starting to notice things that, trying to guess why Ray might have been drawn to them, or what about them spoke to him, or kind of how the connections that we have in the photos he would have been making. And, one thing I also clearly, I'm kind of continuing to look at things that he looked at, but I love just his sort of commitment to, like Lisa was saying, these popular mechanics, or sort of, like crafts that you could find a template for in a magazine. And it was like, you can make this too in your garage. And so, we'll have 20 of these things that were made by 20 different people. And so you could spend a whole afternoon looking at the way that people make a nose, and for 30 different people that made a silent butler, there are 30 different noses. And it's like an entire study of how people render like human facial features. And it's so something that's exciting about having the collection at the Art Preserve, and the sort of function of the Art Preserve is thinking about the way that Ray kind of used his collection and imparted sort of that appreciation of objects, how we can continue to use it and these objects in that way to continue on in that spirit. And what are the different sort of activities, kind of prompts, different arrangements that we can make in there, kind of different projects that we can use the collection to kind of keep pushing it onward through that life that they had while he was alive. So it's definitely not intended to be a sort of static kind of like leaving it as it was when Ray was there, because we got it and it was already separated from how Ray lived there. So kind of really thinking of how to keep it enlivened and kind of keep it evolving, and certainly not adding anything to the collection, but continuing to develop new relationships and sort of new comparisons and new stories and new ways these objects can keep living.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so wonderful, and I saw Lisa when I first got there, and I was so moved to see it again, but I have to say a real highlight and was to see children walking through that and pointing at things, because Ray did say several times, I think early on before he went to Hawaii, I said, well, your collection, how do you envision your collection living on? And he said, I would really like it to be a children's museum, So I really feel like, when I see those children walking around the couple days I was there, it was just, I just thought Ray is just, I can't imagine a smile bigger on his face. So you just be like, he would just be really happy.
And not in a I think this is one of like the utmost compliments, is that I think we do, there's a lot of kids that come through the Art Preserve for a variety of reasons. And I think that, kids have this unadulterated ability to just respond to things. Either, they like it, they don't, this is good, this is bad. And I think that as we grow up, we kind of lose that, and we're sort of constrained into values or aesthetics that we're kind of told matter. And so I think, I love walking around with the kids, because their kind of initial reactions, I am like, yeah, you're right. Like they're just sort of unfiltered, like without having been sort of schooled, you could say, in what matters is kind of the real spirit of this. Like I think of spending time in Ray's collection and with these kids is like an unlearning almost in like the truest way of that. And so it is amazing that these kids, that so many kids are coming and hopefully kind of honing some aesthetic sensibility, like through Ray's very particular and, insightful imagining, is really wonderful. So I'm really, that makes me happy to hear that was something that he hoped for.
It's actually really great, because it's such a permission giving place. You can like anything or everything, that's out there that somebody made. One thing, when we first started talking about doing this program, one idea was that because of it's Art Design Chicago, it's Ray Yoshida, forever associated with Chicago, but also that there are at least 35 or 38 Chicago artists represented in the collection. There may be more, and Laura may know more about this than I do. I was just looking at a list. Frank, you're one of them. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to have your work in this environment?
Well, it's overwhelming, and it's just a great honor when my work was hanging in Ray's house. I was, and Ray did that. You're right. My dear colleague Tim Dowd, I should mention, also was for the first few years was collecting with us, going on these excursions, and he also was collected in Ray's by Ray, and apparently some of that work was broken up at the beginning, and it's with his relatives, but it was overwhelming, and Ray was always I don't even know how else to say it, because it was especially the last painting that he bought of mine was it's the one that's more cryptic, I guess, maybe even more influenced by him. That's just kind of a cloth with a figure. Ray bought that, and then he had it. He never hung it up. He just had it. Ray was watching TV all the time. He especially loved the Judge Judy shows and that kind of stuff. And he'd watch TV while he'd be collaging or, even painting. But he had that one painting leaning up right next to his TV. So I just felt like that's probably the most honored place he could be in his house, with like the millions of other things there. So I can't it's really hard to put into words. And yeah, it's wonderful.
Let me quickly chime in and just say, if there are any questions from our attendees, please feel free to use the Q&A button down below. I was curious, Laura, could you just tell us, for those of us who haven't been to the Art Preserve, could you share a little bit more information about how we can visit and see Frank's work and Ray's collection?
Yeah, of course, we'd love to have all of you come to Sheboygan. For those of you who might not even be familiar with Sheboygan, we're just 2 hours north on the lake, about an hour north from Milwaukee. The Art Preserve is our new sort of 50,000 square foot campus that we opened in June, in addition to our sort of downtown campus that's been open since the 60s. But if you go to our website is artpreserve.org is the special website for the new building. And on there, you'll be able to click through all of the different artists there. There's site photos, there's further information. You can kind of peruse our entire collection of artist-built environments is online there. And then the Art Center has the kind of same hours. I don't need to read them to you because they're all online, but you could come up and spend the weekend or the day in our very lovely lakeside town. And yeah, the Art Preserve is 3 floors. Like I said, there's about 35 artists represented. Ray's collection is on the 2nd floor, sort of the heart of the 2nd floor. And there's tons of other artists there to discover that you may or may not have heard of. And I would welcome anyone to come anytime.
And give yourself a lot of time.
And you do tour, there's tours as well, right?
Yeah, we can offer tours through our sort of education department. Yeah, the art, I could talk about the Art Preserve a lot. It's really designed kind of similar, thinking of Ray as a responder, as he taught himself, and as Lisa said, a responder of the highest order. The Art Preserve, there's a lot of things about it that are kind of maybe not what you would expect when you go to a museum. So it is kind of really designed to wander and to kind of spend a lot of time. Not that you don't spend a lot of time at museums, but it is meant to be explored and sort of we like to talk about meandering through the building instead of walking through. So I hope all of you come and meander and find something new to inspire you.
And if you arrive thirsty, you walk through these grand doors and there is an evocation of Fred Smith's bar tavern, his Rock Garden Tavern with, what's the name of the lager? Fred Smith Lager is
Fred Smith Lager
by Milwaukee brewer. It's a real bar. So what more incentive could you have? Oh, other than the incredible washrooms that are artists designed and quite extraordinary.
Well, I don't think we have any questions from our audience. That's okay. Maybe I can conclude with a question, or if Lisa, Laura, you have questions. I'm just curious, Frank, is there any advice you would give, or any like Ray-inspired advice you might give to someone starting a collection, or who's really inspired by this program, who wants to now embark out into the world and begin collecting? Is there any wisdom that you might impart?
Yeah, I guess maybe an obvious one is just leave your eyes open, and to because I think you had a great question before, Harrison, about what do I have an idea about what this object's what's gonna be used for. I think I would leave yourself open to things might not go into your artwork. Like I have so many, my collection's pretty expansive at this point, and I'm not going to use, a lot of it I've never used for as subject matter in my work, but it doesn't mean it doesn't inspire me, because it populates my studio. And I think, yeah, leave yourself open to your collecting, and collecting's not, the other thing is collecting's not the same as hoarding, I think that's because often, we're in a time where, people are, I want to be like feng shui and everything. And the thing is, I don't think they're the same thing. So I would leave yourself open, definitely. I'll
say in the Art Preserve, one of the other sort of artist home collection that we have is the home and studio of the fiber artist Lenore Tawney. And it is in kind of make a, in the same way that it is a collection of things that an artist didn't necessarily make but lived with and then incorporated into their work. It is similar to Ray's, but in the sorts of objects that Lenora was looking at and the way that she arranged them and the way that she lived with them and thought of them, they couldn't be more different, actually. And that Lenore Tawney's sort of evocation of her home and studio is also on the second floor, kind of near Ray's. And I think for now, those are the only two home collections that we have. Not to say that there won't be more added, but they really provide this really nice spectrum of the way that some of the ways that artists kind of live and work with objects. And so it definitely, Ray's is certainly one style of an artist collecting and living, and Lenore Tawney's is certainly another. And so I think that hopefully the Art Preserve could inspire all different kinds of collecting and all different kinds of arranging, and that Ray was certainly one very influential model.
We actually do have a couple of questions for you, Laura. Someone is wondering if there are any artists on your radar for future accumulation. And does the collection include sketchbooks? If so, can they be viewed by appointment?
So yeah, there's a lot of, I think the question about accumulation or acquisition is probably generally, and we're not acquiring more things for Ray's collection, obviously. Yeah, there's a bunch of different artists on my radar. I can say that we just sort of acquired a portion of Barbara Rossi's home collection and some of her work that will be installed in the Art Preserve eventually. And I have to just share a quick anecdote that Barbara came to the Art Preserve to sort of see the building and see Ray's collection. And it was before we had put up stanchions, and Ray's collection is sort of up on this platform. And, Barbara just stepped right up and kind of stepped right into the space and was sort of handling objects and clearly having memories of being there. And it was really, really amazing just to sort of see her, the intimacy that she had with the space and the objects, and kind of clearly experiencing what it had meant to her. So that was really amazing. So, Barbara's collection, there's currently a kind of temporary exhibit of that shelf, that mirrored shelf that Lisa showed an image of, and some paintings, actually, including the painting that was in the background of her interview in that video. So full circle. But yeah, there's a few other environment builders that we're always kind of looking at. Nothing really to say kind of publicly, but yes, if you know, we are always on the hunt. So if you know of an artist or an environment out in the world that needs saving and needs a kind of steward, we would love to be made aware of them and see how we can assist, either preserving it in situ or helping to find a kind of new appropriate home for it. And then I think the question was about sketchbooks, and no, we don't have kind of bound sketchbooks per se. But we do, it's not, we're working through the process right now, but you could get my contact and send me an email. Part of the Art Preserve's kind of process also is that anyone can be a scholar, and you don't have to have sort of a university or institutional affiliation to view our collection. So if there is an object sort of in the collection that you want a more sort of detailed or close-up look at, or you want to look through works on paper of Ray Yoshida or any other artists in our collection, you can go online, like I said, and view our sort of entire collection online, and you can put in a request, and sort of anyone can do it. We've had retired Sheboygan furniture makers come in and wood carvers. We've had students come in and look at stuff, but anyone can kind of come in, and we'll set you up with the registrar in our study center, and you can really spend some time with objects. So I encourage you, look through the website, see what you want to look at, and you can send us an email and we can get you in.
Laura and Lisa didn't raise letters, or didn't they? Is ephemera go to the Smithsonian?
Yeah, the Archives of American Art, have like a bunch of his papers and stuff too. So that's another really good place to kind of look through some of those more, not that they weren't art related, but yeah, the kind of papers and writings and notes and things.
Okay, and just one more question for the group. Do we know how and when Ray became a collector, and what might have driven him to collect, maybe from his biography?
Good question. I don't know. And I always just assumed that Ray was curious from the get-go, and that he had such profound visual radar, and he was such a complete and total artist given to his work that that then, you know, responding and acquiring and living with objects, which is different, as he described, from kind of collecting and being a collector, and just came naturally to him. But I wish I'd thought of asking that question.
Yeah,
a long time
you know,
ago.
he that's a terrific question. I mean, you know, I mean, jokingly, I would often say, why, you know, Ray, you have so much stuff. What do you know, why? And then he said, I lived through the Depression. I didn't have anything. He would say that, you know, that, you know, I don't know if that was a joke back or something, but just that as a maybe contributor to him to being a collector was that I talked to him about his youth often, and his father had like a fruit stand or something and a store, and Ray would organize the window of this stand or the store, and you know, and he said that was really profoundly inspirational to him. So he said moving the different pieces of fruit around in the window, and that he did from a very young age. And you know, I don't know if that was what got him into collecting, but that is a great, I would like to research that, honestly, because you know, that goes back quite a way, I'm sure.
Yeah, I liked in the, you know, Ray talking about his collection, how he describes it as an affliction, that he doesn't want to be cured of, which to me sort of implies that it has been this kind of lifelong pursuit, you know, that it's always been a part of how he lives in the world. It was probably looking at things. I love that story about arranging fruit. I hadn't heard that.
Well, I just have a couple quick comments about just maybe some of the genesis, which again, you guys probably like. I think, you know, you can't underestimate Whitney Halstead's influence on all of the imagists. And one thing I was discussing with my colleague Tim Dowd, which I found interesting, which also may have contributed to all of them their collecting, was that at that time when they were young artists, or they pop art was popular, you know, pop art and popular culture was so influential, or was kind of the thing of the day. And you know, me and Tim were like kind of discussing the fact that the imagists almost went for unpopular culture, which was folk art, you know, or outsider art, you know. So it was almost, I would say maybe that some of it was a responsive thing, maybe not, maybe I don't want to say reactive, but maybe responsive. And that goes back to what, you know, Lisa was saying, you know, I think there's his collecting probably was started as a response.
I love hearing the story about his father's fruit stand, just because Roger Brown's dad was a grocer and he grew up arranging objects on having a shelf life before he had his own shelves.
Ray loved Roger's family. He would talk about all the time going down and eating the great Southern food, and you know, he was very, very, very close to his family.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop and wrap it for this afternoon. I just want to say thank you so much to my co-presenters and panelists, Lisa, Frank, and Laura. And I also want to say a special thanks to Eva Silverman and Ann Cullen from the Terra Foundation, who have been graciously and expertly helping to facilitate and produce this whole program behind the scenes. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who attended. We've had wonderful turnout for this. I'm so glad that the program resonated with you all. We plan to have a recording available soon, so please be on the lookout for that. And with that, have a wonderful evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great privilege to be with you all. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.